Warframe is a very fun and creatively refreshing take on a typical RPG and progression systems akin to it with its modding system. With the freedom and potential to create all manner of builds, maybe taking an ability designed for light crowd control and nuking enemies with it, or allowing mod upgrades to turn any secondary weapon into a revival tool. Warframe's modding system has it all. But where certain mod concepts are perfected upon religiously over time, some fall to the wayside, leading to some upgrades simply being prioritized too often, since they become mandatory to equip to the point some abilities or weapons literally cannot function without them. In this case, Warframe and weapon augments. These mods have been for many years terribly designed, and betray the fundamental idea of what an augment mod realistically should be in modern Warframe, becoming a cancer that has spread so far that at best provides an optional stat bonus to at worst change any potential build to the augment in question. And that is what we will attempt to solve today. Hello everybody, it is me Sci-Fi, and today I want to dive into Warframe's augment problem. And why? As much as I love him, Limbo is by far its worst offender. Before we can delve into the issue itself, I should probably define what an augment is in the first place to those unfamiliar. Now, definitions will vary depending on who you talk to. I mean, my definition falls under mods that change how an ability behaves to grant interesting effects or changes the fundamental aspects of an ability. However, thankfully, we do have a direct definition as given to us by Digital Extremes. Warframe augment mods are a special category of mods. When installed, Warframe augments alter a Warframe's abilities or passives to perform additional effects, enhancing or modifying that power's utility. From this very definition, we can already see the first problem: enhancing or modifying that power's utility. An augment is just a straight upgrade to an ability in DE's eyes, instead of being a unique change to an ability's functionality. Something that gatekeeps some needed upgrades behind an entire mod slot. The most notable example of this being augments like Corvex's Wrecking Wall augment. A much needed augment that allows this ability to function should not be locked behind a mod. Corvex already suffers as is. This should be a base kit addition. Leading into the second major problem with this mindset, with how it gestates what are called Band-Aid augments, which is to say augments that grant mechanical improvements so substantial that they become mandatory due to how they fix or complete a frame's kit. Gyre being the poster child of this problem, with Cathoid Current, an augment where upon killing an enemy with Cathoid Grace active, it will release an additional 200% damage Thunderbolt from Rotor Swell that grants additional duration to Rotor Swell, equal to the amount gained via Grace. This outright fixes Gyre's Rotor Swell flaws. It makes the augment mandatory to sustain her gameplay loop. Another prime example of this flaw is Equinox's Energy Transfer augment, where switching between forms keeps the charge of the previous form. This outright fixes the survivability problems of day form and the need for light DPS in night form, since you do not need to build up charges again between forms. And to be honest, this should apply to Pacify and Provoke as well, since they have a similar flaw. An augment like this just should not exist, since it holds an entire mechanic hostage behind a paywall of standing or platinum. Now, this isn't to say DE doesn't make augments as a side grade that fundamentally changes how an ability can be used. For example, Oberon's Smite Infusion augment takes a decent DPS option in Smite and adds the ability to turn it into a Warframe weapon damage buff, changing a Warframe ability by its literal definition. Or the very popular Pilfering Strangledome augment, that takes a CC ability like Strangledome and turns it into a looting tool. Or augments like Despoil, where it changes Desecrate from relying on energy to relying on HP to operate, creating more modding leeway for energy but making the user mindful of health as well, which can all be applied to Warframe's various weapon augments, creating a situation where most augments in Warframe are not desired because they provide a new means of playing the game, but because they are at best straight upgrades, or at worst are mandatory to even use a certain ability or an entire frame. Look suspiciously at the Ocu Core. Which then brings us back to what I said at the beginning, with Limbo being the worst offender of this issue. Well, that's because all of his augments are, well, crap. Even Rift Torrent, his best augment, isn't safe from this problem. But how could this be the case? Well, Rift Haven, for example, is the closest thing we have in his kit to being an augment that changes the fundamentals of an ability, because it makes it so Banish grants percentage-based HP regen for allies, turning Banish from a displacement tool to a healing tool. It's just sad that it doesn't work on himself, and frankly, HP tanking sucks. Rift Torrent is simply a 30% weapon damage buff per surged enemy, which sounds different since it changes your playstyle to being one about maximizing enemy density to deal damage, which on the surface is true, until you remember that as Limbo, you already want to get as many enemies as you can under your control, and through various mods or arcanes can do plenty enough damage without having the augment in the first place. Finally, we have Cataclysmic Continuum. Get 1 second of duration back for Cataclysm per kill in Cataclysm. Kinda nice with grouping tools, but otherwise shouldn't exist or just be made a base kit edition. Limbo, by the very definition of what an augment should be, feels on all accounts, and it angers me to hell and back because it just shouldn't be this way at all. So then, with everything stated up to this point, how can this issue be solved? Well, to be honest, the best way would be to remove every single Band-Aid augment, apply them to the base kit, and completely revamping all existing augments into side grades, either by toning down effects or by redefining what the augment does. However, knowing DE, that would be too much work and could cause more problems than it solves. The second would be giving Warframes either a dedicated augment slot, or making it so augments can be placed in the Excellus slot. This would help the Band-Aid augment weapons and frames, but it doesn't fix the issues with augments, and for some could allow them to be overtuned, since something like Blind Rage could be placed in its stead, granting a massive boost in power, since more slots can be dedicated to improving said augment. Because at the end of the day, I don't think DE wants to make augment side grades or have many downsides to using it, because they unfortunately do have an incentive to sell upgrades for monetary gain. And given how popular Band-Aid augments are in particular, DE in the end does benefit from selling power every update. But again, these issues shouldn't be allowed to continue, since it can harm the perception of a frame or weapon if an augment fixes its biggest problems. So, I have my own more unique solution, a way to save the future of augments by looking to the past. Warframe is a massive game with a variety of systems that are constantly added and evolving, and the old progression system was no different. Back in the early days of the game's lifespan, Warframe's leveling system was very different, operating on a node-based progression system, with Orokin reactors being used to unlock the second half of the nodes. Abilities were also mod-based and could be swapped out at will. That was until the system was eventually overhauled into the modding system we all love and hate today. All this is to say, what if we were to reintroduce the system, but in a more interesting way that satisfies those within the meta, hardcore min-maxers, and DE themselves? Warframe Augmentation Adapters, a concept from yours truly, is a new equipable adapter unlockable from a new piece of content, which unlocks a newly introduced Warframe tech tree system, consisting of 30 or more base nodes, with outer nodes consisting of severely weakened versions of the current Warframe augments. Think of it like Dead Space's power node system for upgrades, where each of their nodes provide an upgrade to a specific stat, but very small amounts. Say one node at the center gives a 5% increase to HP, armor, and energy for that specific frame, with the branching nodes being stronger increases to individual abilities or a Warframe's passive, but with a specific stat or mechanic being nerfed to offset it. Say there's a node that increases an ability's base range by 2 meters, but that specific ability or all ability duration is reduced by 10 to 20%. That way you can enhance a frame and fine-tune it in a more interesting way, without being an outright buff to it to maintain some balance and the need for mods. And the way you would be able to empower these nodes is simply by leveling up the frame, where every 2 levels you get 1 node, which isn't affected by aura mods, maximizing at least 15 nodes to activate. meaning you cannot have every buff active at once, and if you want to swap out your nodes, you don't have to pay anything, and you can swap things out as much as you want. Which is very important because Warframe's augments are now in these final nodes. The final nodes, or apex nodes as I'm coining, are where Warframe's augments now reside, however at significantly reduced effectiveness. As a hypothetical, let's put Rift Torrent as one of these nodes. Its damage is now 10% per enemy, but more importantly, this bonus will no longer scale with power strength, with other smaller bonuses existing as well. Like a possible set of brand new bonuses, up to 4 Apex nodes per new frame released, with new ones added over time. But you may be thinking, that sounds awful. It's an outright nerf to so many augments and frames. Well, that's where the old augment mods come in. Augment mods, now called Apex Enhancers, are now mod upgrades that can triple or quadruple the effects of an Apex node. Looking back to Rift Torrent, it will now enhance the node by 4 times while active, but with an added negative of increasing Rift Torrent's cost by 50% while allowing it to scale with power strength. This kind of system for frames will allow DE to do quite a few things. DE can introduce severely weaken the nodes to test ideas for future augments. It adds some risk and reward to the augment system, but more importantly, it allows frames that need functions of some current augments to work without having to waste a mod slot on an augment to get it. And depending on some of the nodes, can give you the opportunity to run a little taste of every current augment without having to have every augment on your frame at the same time. A system like this, in my opinion, would give the game a whole new avenue for modding potential, and breathe new life into the system as well. Now obviously this idea isn't final, and I doubt DE would want to make something like this. But given DE can't make a good augment to save their lives, I genuinely think this would be the best path forward. And with that, I take my leave. Thank you for watching. If you liked what you saw, consider leaving a like and a comment telling me how I did. If you want to keep up with me in the future, consider subscribing or joining my Discord. And if you want to support me directly in the future, consider subscribing to my Patreon. And with that, I'll see you all later. Have an amazing day.